There is a figure in the darkness of the 41st millennium who has no name, not in the way that soldiers without names die on forgotten worlds and are never remembered, not in the way that a nameless refugee gets lost in the crush of a billion-strong hive city population and simply ceases to matter to the machinery of the Imperium. No, this particular absence of a name is deliberate. It is a wound cut by hand, a piece of identity that was removed as precisely as a surgeon removes a diseased organ with care, with purpose, with the understanding that what remains will function differently because of what is gone. He is called Cypher, and that word is not his name. It is not even close to his name. It is a title, or perhaps a rank, or perhaps a riddle, or perhaps all three of those things at once, and none of them simultaneously. The word cipher itself carries meanings that spiral outward endlessly the more you think about them. It means a secret or coded message. It means a zero, a nothing, an absence. It means a person of no importance. It means a key used to decode hidden writing. Every single one of those definitions fits the man who carries this label, and every single one of them contradicts the others in ways that feel deliberate rather than accidental. He walks through the darkness of the galaxy, dressed in white robes worn over ancient power armor. He carries twin pistols, a bolt pistol in one hand, a plasma pistol in the other, and he fires them both simultaneously with an accuracy that should not be physically possible for any being that was not engineered for war in the deepest, most fundamental ways. He also carries a sword sheathed at his side that he has never, in 10,000 years of recorded appearances and encounters, been seen to draw in battle. Not once. He has been hunted for over 10,000 years by some of the most relentless warriors in the entire Imperium of man. He has escaped every trap, slipped through every net, disappeared from cells and prisons and dungeons that were specifically designed to hold things far more dangerous than a single space marine. And through all of it, he has never fully explained himself to anyone. He has offered fragments, hints, gestures toward meaning, but never the complete picture, never the full truth. Not to his allies, not to his enemies, not even to the Primarch of an entire Space Marine chapter who held his freedom in his hands. To the Imperium at large, he is a ghost story, a whispered rumor passed between officers and inquisitors, a thread of unverified reports connecting sightings of a lone figure in white robes across a dozen sectors, 100 worlds, 1,000 years. The Dark Angels, one of the oldest and most secretive chapters of the Adeptus Astartes, have dedicated enormous resources, sacrificed lives, and squandered campaigns in the pursuit of this one figure. And they have never caught him. Not permanently. Not in a way that mattered. The Inquisition has tried. The Officio Assassinorum, the organization that employs the most lethal killing specialists the Imperium produces, has dispatched operatives to eliminate him. They have all failed. Every single one. And what makes all of this genuinely extraordinary is that nobody in the 41st millennium can say with certainty whether Cypher is an enemy or an ally, whether he is a servant of chaos or a secret weapon of the Emperor, whether the sword he carries on his hip is an instrument of salvation or annihilation, whether the destination toward which he has slowly, patiently, relentlessly been moving the golden heart of the entire Imperium of man, the world of Terra itself, represents his greatest gift or the final act of a 10,000-year conspiracy. He is, without any serious competition, the most mysterious character in all of Warhammer 40,000, and to understand why, you have to go back, far back, past the wars that defined the Imperium, past the age of heresy that nearly destroyed everything humanity had built. You have to go back to a world that no longer exists, covered in forests so dense and so old that the darkness between the trees had its own weight, its own pressure, its own hunger. You have to go back to Caliban, because that is where Cypher begins. That is where everything about him was forged, in the shadow and fire and betrayal of a world that the universe itself seems to have tried to erase from the record. And before we go any further into this, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me where in the world you are watching this from and what time it is where you are. There is something wonderful about knowing that this story is reaching people in the middle of the night in one time zone and over lunch in another. This is a story built for quiet moments, for dark hours, for the kind of contemplative stillness that Warhammer 40,000 lore always seems to call for. So tell me where you are. And if you have not subscribed yet, please do. There is so much more of this kind of storytelling coming, and you do not want to miss any of it. Now, let us go to Caliban. Section 2. The World That Made Him. Caliban. Caliban was a death world before the term death world was even properly formalized in imperial taxonomy. It was a planet of dense, ancient forest that covered almost everything, a world where the trees grew so thick and so tall that in many places the sunlight never reached the ground at all, and the creatures that evolved to fill that ecological space grew accordingly enormous and accordingly terrible. Great beasts stalked the darkness between the roots, massive predators, unlike anything that had evolved anywhere else in the known galaxy, creatures that were saturated with the energy of the warp in ways that made them more than simply biological. They were almost supernatural. They were old, and they had been shaped by something older still. The people of Caliban survived in spite of all of this. They carved out small communities within fortified walls, places of relative safety, ringed by light and iron, and they lived lives that were short and brutal, and defined almost entirely by the necessity of survival. The great beasts were not just animals to be avoided, they were existential threats that could, and occasionally did, destroy entire settlements. The population of Caliban lived under constant siege, not from invading armies, but from the world itself. And in this environment, there arose a tradition, a brotherhood, a knightly order. They called themselves the Order, capital T, capital O. Not one of several orders, not a faction within a larger institution, simply the Order, as if to acknowledge that, in a world as hostile as Caliban, there was really only one thing worth being if you wanted to both survive and matter. The Knights of the Order were the protectors of the civilian population, the warriors who ventured into the dark forest to hunt the great beasts, the figures around whom the culture of an entire civilization built itself. They were respected, they were revered, they were, in the most literal sense possible, the thing that stood between the people of Caliban and annihilation. The Order had ranks, traditions, rituals, codes. It had an internal hierarchy built on merit and accomplishment, on the number of beasts slain and the courage demonstrated under pressure. And it had titles, ceremonial positions that carried specific responsibilities within the Brotherhood. Some of these titles were practical: commanders, surgeons, quartermasters. Others were more philosophical, more abstract, touching on the organization's relationship with its own history and identity. One of those titles was Lord Cypher. The Lord Cypher was, in the traditions of the Order, the keeper of secrets and the guardian of tradition. This person was responsible for all matters of protocol, for officiating at important ceremonies, for maintaining the accumulated lore and custom of the Brotherhood. But the role went deeper than simple administration. The Lord Cypher was understood to embody the Order's principles in a very specific and demanding way. Upon assuming the position, the person who took the title was expected to abandon their previous identity entirely. Their name, their personal history, their individual face, even because the Lord Cypher wore a cloak and hood at all times, keeping their appearance concealed. They were not a person anymore. They were the role. They were the tradition itself, made flesh. This detail matters enormously. It is the source of one of the deepest mysteries surrounding the figure we now know as Cypher. Because if the Lord Cypher was always a title, always a position rather than a person, then the individual we are discussing may not be the first person to have held it. There may have been multiple Cyphers, multiple people who inherited not just the rank, but the equipment, the methods, the personality, the entire constructed persona that goes with the position. Like a mask passed from wearer to wearer, with each successive holder becoming, in all the ways that matter, indistinguishable from the ones before. That idea is not academic speculation. There are genuine reasons, grounded in the lore itself, to believe it might be true, and we will come back to them. But first, we need to talk about the Order of the Knights of Lupus, because these people, this specific group of Calibanite knights, are the root of the entire story. They are the poisoned seed from which everything else grew. The Knights of Lupus were a rival order on Caliban, a brotherhood of knights who had taken a very different approach to the darkness that saturated their world. Where the Order fought the great beasts and sought to protect the civilian population, the Knights of Lupus studied the beasts. They collected knowledge about them. They sought to understand the warp energies that saturated these creatures, to learn how those energies worked and what they meant, and critically, how they might be used. They were, in the most straightforward interpretation of their history, a cult, a group that had crossed the line from studying corruption to being corrupted by it. When the Primarch Lionel Johnson arrived on Caliban, a discussion we will come to shortly, he eventually discovered the truth about the Knights of Lupus. He destroyed them, almost entirely. The Brotherhood was ended, their strongholds brought down, their lore burned or seized, almost entirely, because one person survived. One member of the Knights of Lupus lived through the destruction of everything they had been, and that survivor, through circumstances and persuasions that the records do not clearly document, was permitted to join the Order, and eventually the Dark Angels Legion that grew from it. That survivor became, in time, the Lord Cypher. Think carefully about what that means. The very first person to hold the title that has haunted the galaxy for 10,000 years was a survivor of a chaos-tainted Night Order who joined their destroyers under a false name, carrying with them knowledge of warp corruption that their adoptive brotherhood could not even guess they possessed. That individual introduced Luther, the man who would eventually lead the great betrayal of Caliban, to what the records describe, with deliberate vagueness, as the truths of chaos. The rot that would eventually swallow Caliban whole was planted by the very first Cypher. And whether the figure who now walks the 41st millennium is that same person, or a successor who inherited the title and all its weight, the origin of the role is stained with that original deception. It is baked into the identity. It cannot be separated from it. Section 3. The Primarch and the Paradise. Lost. Before we can properly understand the fall of Caliban, we need to understand what Caliban was before it fell, and that means understanding what happened when Lionel Johnson arrived. The Primarchs were the Emperor's greatest creations, beings of impossible power and ability, engineered at the dawn of the Great Crusade to lead the Space Marine legions in the conquest and reunification of the human galaxy. Each one was crafted to embody different qualities, different aspects of leadership and warfare. But during the chaotic process of their creation, the infant Primarchs were scattered across the galaxy by the ruinous powers, cast to distant worlds where they grew up separated from their father and from each other. Lionel Johnson ended up on Caliban. He landed as an infant in one of the most hostile environments in the known galaxy, and survived. Not just survived, thrived. He grew up in the darkness of the Calibanite forests, learning to hunt the great beasts through trial and error and what can only be described as preternatural instinct. When the Order eventually found him, a wild, feral figure who had lived alone in the forest long enough to become something almost more than human, he was already a warrior of extraordinary capability. The Knights of the Order were stunned by what they encountered, and in their ranks was a man named Luther. Luther was, at the time, one of the finest warriors the Order had ever produced. He was beloved, respected, admired, a leader of men in every meaningful sense, and he recognized in the wild young figure they had discovered something that both excited and disturbed him. He took the lion under his wing, became his mentor, his teacher, his closest companion, and together they transformed Caliban. With Lionel Johnson at their head, the Order hunted the great beasts with unprecedented aggression and effectiveness. In the space of years, what had taken generations was accomplished. The great monsters of Caliban were exterminated. The forests that had been sources of terror became simply forests. The death world began, slowly, to become livable in ways it never had been before. And when the Emperor arrived to collect his lost son, he found a world that had been changed by the presence of a Primarch, and a Primarch who had been changed by the world. Lionel Johnson joined the Great Crusade and took many of the finest warriors of Caliban with him to form the core of his Space Marine Legion, the First Legion, later called the Dark Angels. But he could not take everyone. He could not take Luther. The exact reason for this decision is, characteristically, not clearly documented. Some accounts suggest that Luther's genetic makeup was discovered to be unsuitable for full Space Marine enhancement, which would have made him feel the slight of being left behind with particular bitterness. Others suggest the lion had political reasons for the decision, that Luther's popularity and influence made him useful as an administrator on Caliban, but potentially problematic in the personal retinue of a Primarch. Whatever the reason, Luther stayed. And there, alone on a world that had been transformed, surrounded by knights who had been passed over for the glory of the Great Crusade, Luther began to wait. And waiting, as it turned out, was the thing that broke him. The records of what happened on Caliban during the Great Crusade and the early years of the Horus heresy are incomplete in ways that feel intentional rather than accidental. What is known is that Luther and those left behind fell into a kind of spiritual and psychological drift. Cut off from the glory of the crusade, feeling overlooked and undervalued, they began to study the old knowledge of Caliban, the lore of the great beasts, the warp energies that had saturated their world for so long. And somewhere in that process, the influence of the Knight of Lupus survivor, the Lord Cypher, carrying knowledge of chaos that the Order had never properly understood, began to matter. The whispered truths that the original Cypher had kept secret for so long found soil in Luther's growing resentment. The dark powers, sensing an opportunity, began to work on those who had been left behind. By the time the Horus heresy unfolded elsewhere in the galaxy, Caliban had already been changed. Luther and many of those who followed him had been, to varying degrees, touched by chaos. And they had been kept ignorant, deliberately or otherwise, of the great war that was consuming the Imperium. When the news eventually reached them fragmented, distorted, arriving through unreliable channels, the isolation and the corruption together had already done their work. Section 4. The Fall of Caliban. The Horus heresy is the defining catastrophe of Warhammer 40,000 lore. It is the moment when the galaxy-spanning empire of humanity came closest to total, irreversible collapse. Horus, the greatest of the Primarchs, the War Master himself, the being to whom the Emperor had entrusted overall command of the Great Crusade, turned against his father and led half the Space Marine legions in open rebellion. The resulting conflict killed billions of people, destroyed civilizations, shattered the Imperium's confidence in itself in ways that have never fully healed. The Dark Angels, under Lionel Johnson, played a complicated and deeply honorable role in this conflict. The Lion fought his way through multiple campaigns, eventually reaching Terra in time to participate in the final stages of the defense. He was a loyalist, committed to the Emperor, willing to spend the lives of his warriors in the name of the Imperium's survival. But when the heresy ended and the Lion returned home to Caliban, he found something waiting for him that no one had predicted. His own world opened fire on him. The planetary defense weapons of Caliban, weapons that should have welcomed the return of their Primarch, activated against his fleet as it entered orbit. The bombardment was accurate and devastating. Ships were destroyed. Warriors died. And the Lion, who had just survived one of the bloodiest conflicts in human history, found himself in combat with his own home. It was Luther. Luther had rallied those who felt betrayed and forgotten, those who had been left behind while others earned glory, those who had been touched most deeply by the chaos energies that had slowly saturated the world during the long years of waiting. He had, in the language of the warp, fallen, and in falling he had taken many with him. The Lion's response was exactly what you would expect from a Primarch, furious, overwhelming, and personal. He launched an assault on Caliban, bombarding it from orbit, while simultaneously teleporting down to lead the assault on the Dark Angel's fortress monastery, the place known as Alderuk. He was going to face Luther directly. He was going to end this. The duel between Lionel Johnson and Luther has the quality of genuine tragedy about it. These were two men who had been, by all accounts, genuinely close. Luther had been the Lion's mentor, his earliest teacher, the person who had first recognized the feral boy in the forest as something extraordinary. And now they stood across from each other in the ruins of everything they had built together, and they tried to kill one another. The battle was prolonged, devastating, and fought with the full power of two beings who had been enhanced by the warp because Luther, by this point, had been gifted terrible strength by the dark powers he served. They destroyed entire sections of the fortress as they fought, and at the end of it, the Lion lay dying from a psychic attack, and Luther, looking at what he had done, at the person lying at his feet, broke. The realization of how far he had fallen, of what the chaos influence had turned him into, crashed over him and left him unable to continue. He collapsed, weeping, and allowed himself to be taken captive by the surviving Dark Angels. At that moment, the Chaos Gods, who have never rewarded sincere repentance with anything but rage, withdrew their patronage from Luther's forces in a way that was both instant and spectacular. They sent a warp storm of tremendous violence to consume Caliban and scatter Luther's followers across time and space. The planet itself could not survive the energies involved. It tore apart. Caliban was destroyed. What remained was a small portion of the world, the Rock of Alderuk itself, the ruined core of the fortress monastery. The Dark Angels would eventually hollow it out, rebuild it, encase it in void shields and weapons systems, and turn it into the mobile fortress monastery known as the Rock, their home and their greatest secret, traveling the galaxy in pursuit of the thing that Luther's scattering had created. Because Luther's followers, swept up in that warp storm and flung across space and time, did not simply die. Many of them survived. They emerged from the warp at different times in different places, scattered across thousands of years and hundreds of worlds. Some arrived in the 31st millennium, barely separated in time from the fall itself. Others emerged in the 35th millennium, or the 38th, or the 40th, with no subjective sense that any time had passed at all. The warp had distributed them like seeds thrown into the wind. These scattered survivors are called the Fallen, and hunting them, capturing them, interrogating them, making them repent, and then granting them the silence of death became the defining purpose of the Dark Angels chapter and all its successor chapters for the next 10,000 years. The Lord Cypher was among the fallen who survived the destruction of Caliban, or at least someone wearing the title and bearing the accoutrements of the Lord Cypher was. Because the records from this period are incomplete in the most frustrating possible ways, and no one can say with certainty whether the figure who emerged from the warp was the original holder of the title or a successor who had claimed it, or something else entirely. Section 5. The Fallen and the Hunt. The secret that the Dark Angels have kept for 10,000 years is one of the most consequential lies in the entire Imperium of Man. On the surface, the First Legion are paragons, ancient, proud, covered in honors, earned over millennia of service to the Emperor. They are among the most respected chapters of the Adeptus Astartes. Other chapters look at them with something approaching awe, but the inner circle knows the truth. The senior members of the Dark Angels, those who have been gradually, carefully, and often painfully trusted with the chapter's deepest secret, know that their legion fractured during the Horus Heresy, that many of their brothers fell to chaos, that the destruction of Caliban was a consequence of that falling, and that the fallen are still out there, still alive, scattered through time and space, a living testimony to the greatest shame the chapter has ever known. The inner circle does not call the fallen traitors in the way the word is usually used. They do not see them as simple chaos worshippers to be exterminated like any other enemy. The fallen are something more complicated, more personal, more painful than that. They are brothers who chose the wrong path, and this is crucial. They cannot die in obscurity. They cannot simply be killed and forgotten. They must repent. They must confess the truth of what happened on Caliban and what role they played in it, and they must acknowledge their betrayal of the Lion and the Emperor before they are allowed to receive the peace of death. This is not mercy. The process of making a fallen repent involves the interrogator chaplains, who are specialists in exactly the kind of prolonged, intensive work that the phrase "making someone repent" implies. It involves the librarians with their psychic abilities, reading the prisoner's history from their very memories. It involves time and patience, and the application of considerable suffering. The Dark Angels have, over 10 millennia, drifted into practices that would have horrified their founders, and they know it, and they continue anyway, because the secret must be maintained, and the fallen must be silenced. Of all the fallen, none is more feared, more hated, or more desperately sought than Cypher. He is the one they want above all others, and he has eluded them for longer and more completely than any other member of the Fallen has ever managed. What makes Cypher unique among the Fallen is not just his ability to escape and survive, it is his influence. Where other Fallen tend to become regional warlords, or chaos champions, or simply try to live quiet lives under assumed identities on distant worlds, Cypher seems to operate on a different scale entirely. He appears across the galaxy in apparently unconnected locations, and wherever he appears, things shift. Rebellions begin. Uprisings occur. Power structures that seem stable suddenly crack and give way. And not always in ways that obviously serve chaos. That is the part that makes him genuinely impossible to categorize. There are recorded instances where Cypher's actions directly benefited the Imperium. During what is recorded as the Red Heresy, he actively aided the Silver Skull's Space Marine chapter. He is rumored to have been involved in events that ultimately strengthened Imperial defenses in regions that were later threatened by larger forces. He appears, does something that looks incomprehensible in the moment, and then vanishes, and it is only later, sometimes much later, that the shape of what he was doing begins to clarify. Or doesn't. Sometimes it never clarifies at all. Sometimes what Cypher does simply remains inexplicable, a piece of the galaxy's history that refuses to fit neatly into any narrative of loyalty or betrayal. The Dark Angels have never been able to decide whether they are hunting a traitor or a hidden ally, and that uncertainty eats at them. It has eaten at them for 10,000 years. Section 6. 10,000 Years in the Shadows. Tracking the movements of Cypher through the history of the Imperium is an exercise in carefully following smoke. The records are scattered, incomplete, often contradictory. Accounts are filtered through the perspectives of people who were either trying to capture him, trying to use him, or trying to kill him, which means that almost every source is unreliable in its own particular way. What the records do establish, across all the noise and contradiction, is a pattern of behavior that remains remarkably consistent across millennia. Cypher appears alone, or in the company of other fallen who seem drawn to him through means that no one has ever been able to explain. He wears white robes over his power armor, a choice that should make him conspicuous and has, paradoxically, become a kind of calling card. He is unmistakable, even when he is trying not to be seen, and there is a school of thought that suggests this is intentional, that the visibility is the point. He fights, when he fights, with those twin pistols. The bolt pistol and the plasma pistol, wielded simultaneously, fired with an accuracy that veteran warriors and experienced inquisitors describe in terms usually reserved for supernatural phenomena. Every shot finds its target. Every shot placed exactly where it needs to go to achieve the maximum desired effect, whether that effect is lethality or warning or something more subtle still. He does not miss, not in any engagement on record. The barrel of his plasma pistol never overheats, never misfires, a weapon that, in other hands, regularly kills its wielder through catastrophic energy release, behaves. For Cypher, as reliably as if it were manufactured yesterday, rather than being an ancient relic of an earlier age. And the sword sits on his hip, sheathed, undrawn. 10,000 years, every battle, never drawn. His first confirmed identification as an active figure comes during what the records call the Forgotten Wars, a general term for conflicts in the early post-heresy period that the Imperium's recovery efforts were too disorganized to document properly. Even here, the records are fragmentary. But this is where the Dark Angels first registered the signals associated with Cypher. Strange psychic flickering, the appearance of fallen in unexpected locations, the sense of a directing intelligence behind scattered events. Since then, the sightings accumulate across the millennia like sediment. A rebellion on Septius VII that bears the fingerprints of his orchestration, altering power structures in ways that only make sense long after the fact. The killing of an orc war boss who had slain a supreme grand master of the Dark Angels, an act of violence that benefited the chapter that hunts him above all things. An appearance during the Nova Terra Interregnum, a centuries-long period of civil conflict that split the Imperium, where unverified accounts describe a figure matching his description, acting in ways consistent with saving the world of Praxis. An encounter with one of the Citan, the ancient star gods, turned into shattered fragments of themselves by the Necrons, specifically the entity known as the Deceiver, perhaps the most comprehensively treacherous being in the entire galaxy. This encounter occurred during the opening stages of the 13th Black Crusade, Abaddon's great assault on the Cadian Gate. Cypher was carrying, at this point, a weapon that the records describe as a Citan phase knife, a blade similar to those used by the Calidus assassins, capable of cutting through almost any material by phasing through its molecular structure. The battle with the Deceiver seems to have occurred in the warp, or on the boundary of it, and seems to have involved some kind of temporal loop or fold that makes definitively establishing what happened almost impossible. What is known is that the blade was lost, and through all of it, across all the centuries and worlds and conflicts, Cypher moves with the sense of someone who has a destination in mind, someone who is going somewhere specific, even if the route is impossibly long and impossibly indirect. The pattern of his appearances, when analyzed across millennia, suggests a slow drift, a gradual, patient movement in a particular direction, toward Terra. Always, eventually, toward Terra. The Dark Angels, who have spent their lives studying Cypher's movements, call this the most disturbing thing about him. Not his individual actions, which can be analyzed and sometimes rationalized. Not even his ability to escape capture, which is remarkable but perhaps explicable through skill and preparation. What disturbs them most is the patience. The sense that Cypher is operating on a timescale that makes normal strategic thinking look like impatience. That he has been working towards something for 10,000 years and has never been in a particular hurry, because he understands, on some level, that his pursuers do not, that the time was not yet right. Not yet. Those two words will become important. Hold on to them. Section 7. The sword that never leaves its scabbard. There is no detail about Cypher more discussed, more speculated about, more argued over in the histories of both the Imperium and the Warhammer 40,000 community than the sword he carries on his hip. It is an ancient weapon, clearly old, clearly of significant craftsmanship. It sits in a worn scabbard that speaks to centuries of use, or perhaps millennia. And in every single recorded engagement involving Cypher across 10,000 years of documented activity, it has never been drawn. Think about what that means. A figure who has fought his way out of ambushes, escapes, assassinations, and full military engagements. A figure whose twin pistols are already extraordinary weapons in their own right. A figure who has faced enemies ranging from orcs and heretics to space marines and custodians, the finest individual warriors the Imperium produces. And through all of it, the sword stays sheathed. Why? That is the question. And the answers that have been proposed over the years range from the prosaic to the profound. The most widely circulated theory is that the sword is the Lion Sword, the legendary blade that Lionel Johnson himself carried during the Great Crusade and the Horus Heresy. This weapon, which was gifted to the Lion by the Emperor himself, according to some accounts, is broken. It was damaged in the conflict of the Heresy era, cracked or shattered at some point during the great battles of that age. And the theory holds that Cypher carries the broken blade with the intention of presenting it to the Emperor on his golden throne, a gesture of contrition, a symbolic request for the forgiveness of the fallen, an act of penance that would serve as both apology and absolution. Under this reading, Cypher's 10,000-year journey is an act of redemption. He is carrying a broken thing toward the only being who can make it whole, and the slowness of the journey is not evasion but preparation, ensuring that when he finally arrives, the conditions are right for the presentation to mean what he needs it to mean. There is something almost unbearably poignant about this theory. A man without a name, carrying a broken sword across millennia, doing things that look like chaos and destruction because the direct path is closed to him, moving one step at a time toward a moment of grace that 10,000 years of war and loss and solitude have not made him doubt. But there is another theory, one that is darker and in some ways more compatible with the grimdark of the setting. What if the sword is not a gift but a weapon? What if Cypher carries it because it is the one thing in existence capable of killing the Emperor? And what if killing the Emperor is actually part of the plan? This is not as straightforwardly villainous as it sounds. The Emperor, trapped on his golden throne, is in agony. He has been slowly dying for 10,000 years, sustained by the deaths of 1,000 psychers every single day, unable to do more than weakly influence events through psychic communication and the faint light of the Astronomicon. There is a school of thought within the lore, held by certain imperial factions and also by certain fallen, that the Emperor would be better served by death and rebirth than by this endless, degrading maintenance, that a quick death would allow him to return as something greater, a true god capable of fighting chaos directly, rather than slowly crumbling in a machine. If that is the mission, if the broken sword is intended not for presentation but for use, and if Cypher genuinely believes that killing the Emperor would save humanity, rather than destroy it, then his entire journey takes on a completely different character, not redemption. Not villainy either, exactly. Something stranger and more uncomfortable than either. The truth is that both theories, and several others besides, are alive in the lore simultaneously, because Games Workshop and the Black Library authors have never settled the question. Cypher has been intentionally maintained as an open mystery. Even the novel dedicated entirely to his perspective, John French's Cypher, Lord of the Fallen, is told from Cypher's own unreliable point of view, which means that nothing he says can be taken at face value. Even the most intimate access to his thoughts does not resolve the question, which is, itself, a kind of answer about the nature of the character. What we do know is that the sword's existence has become known to at least one Primarch. When Cypher eventually arrived in the presence of Robert Guillemot, a story we are coming to, Guillemot recognized what Cypher was carrying, and it was, at least in part, the presence of that sword that made Guillemot unwilling to let Cypher approach the Emperor, despite the service Cypher had rendered to the Terran Crusade. That reaction from one of the wisest and most strategically sophisticated beings alive tells us something. Whatever the sword is, and whatever its purpose, it is significant enough that a Primarch who has just been saved by the man carrying it would still refuse to allow it anywhere near his father. Section 8. Surrender and the Inner Circle. Before the events of the Terran Crusade that would define Cypher's role in the current era of the lore, there was an episode that is often overlooked, but deserves careful attention, because it illuminates something important about how Cypher operates. At some point in the 41st millennium, Cypher did something that no one expected. He turned himself in to the Dark Angels, to the very people who had been hunting him for 10,000 years. He walked into the Inner Circle's custody, voluntarily. The reasons were his own, as always, and have never been fully clarified. But what transpired during his captivity tells us a great deal. With the assistance of the Watchers in the Dark, the small, robed, non-human figures that have followed the Dark Angels for millennia, and whose own nature and purpose are their own mystery, Cypher managed to persuade the Inner Circle to use one of the chapter's most powerful and dangerous artifacts, an ancient engine called Tukulcha. Tukulcha was a machine of alien design and obscure function, capable of manipulating space and time in ways that the chapter barely understood and certainly could not fully control. Cypher convinced the Inner Circle to use it to open a time rift over the ruins of Caliban, ostensibly to prevent other forces, specifically a coalition involving Astalan and the plague-spread typhus of the Death Guard, from doing the same thing for their own purposes. The rift was eventually destroyed by Azrael, the Supreme Grand Master of the Dark Angels, in an act that created or recreated, depending on your perspective, the very warp storm that had originally scattered the Fallen 10,000 years before. The disaster that defined the chapter's entire history, and Cypher had maneuvered them into repeating it. And then he vanished, as he always does, before anyone could truly reckon with what had happened. Was this an act of malice? Was Cypher trying to strengthen chaos by recreating the storm? Or was he trying to prevent something worse, the manipulation of that same storm by chaos forces for their own purposes? Or was he testing something, running an experiment whose results only he can interpret? There are people in the chapter who will tell you he betrayed them. There are others who will tell you, quietly, that the sector they defended in the aftermath of all this was significantly more fortified than it had been before, and that when a subsequent chaos assault arrived, it was met by forces that were far better prepared than they would otherwise have been. Cause and effect are genuinely difficult to establish when the cause involves warp manipulation and 10,000 years of patient planning. What we can say is that this episode demonstrates something core about Cypher's methodology. He is willing to do things that look, in the short term, like catastrophic betrayals. He is willing to use allies as instruments, to work toward goals that his allies do not understand and have not consented to appear villainous in the moment on the understanding that the longer view will vindicate him or won't, depending on what he is actually trying to do. He operates, in other words, like someone who is playing a game whose rules only he knows. Everyone else is improvising. Cypher is following a plan. After his escape from the Dark Angels, the pursuit resumed. Elements of multiple unforgiven chapters closed in on him again. And Cypher, as always, stayed ahead of them, moved in directions that made no obvious sense, appeared in places where no one expected him, and continued his slow transit toward the center of everything. Section 9. Walking with Guilliman, the Terran Crusade. The greatest event in recent 40,000 lore, the return of Roboute Guilliman, Primarch of the Ultramarines and Lord Commander of the Imperium, was an event of such scale and consequence that it reshaped the entire setting. The 13th Black Crusade had broken through the Cadian Gate. Cadia itself had fallen. The Great Rift was opening, a galaxy-spanning tear in reality that would divide the Imperium into two halves and plunge vast regions of space into the nightmare of the warp. The galaxy was, in the most literal possible sense, ending. And in the middle of all this, Roboute Guilliman was entombed in a stasis coffin on the world of Macragge, kept alive, but not truly living for 10,000 years, by technology that should not have been able to do what it was doing. An ancient and impenetrable container of his dying form, waiting for a moment that might never come. The effort to revive him, the Terran Crusade, drew in warriors from multiple factions, including the Grey Knights, the Adeptus Custodes, members of the Ultramarines, and figures from across the Imperium. But it also ran into obstacles. On a Red Corsair's Blackstone fortress, captured by the renegade Space Marines who served the piratical Huron Blackheart, the Crusade's leadership found themselves imprisoned. Guilliman, recently revived through the intervention of Roboute's father and the Ynnari Eldar, was held captive alongside the other members of the Terran Crusade, and the Blackstone Fortress was designed to hold exactly the kind of beings that were imprisoned within it. Enter Cypher. He appeared alongside a Harlequin Shadowseer named Silandri Veilwalker, the Harlequins being the masked performers of the Eldar, who travel the webway and serve purposes related to the Eldar trickster god Segorak, purposes that are never straightforward and always layered with meaning. Together they killed the guards, secured the keys to the cells, and stood before Roboute Guilliman, the living proof of the Emperor's vision, a Primarch, a being of legend, and offered him a deal. Cypher would free Guilliman and help him reach Terra. In return, Guilliman would bring Cypher to Terra and allow him an audience with the Emperor himself. The Primarch had, in the most immediate sense, no choice. He was in a cell. His crusade was imprisoned around him. The alternative was dying in captivity, while the galaxy fell apart outside. And so, with reservations that he did not bother to conceal, Guilliman agreed. What followed was a journey of genuine cooperative heroism wrapped in constant mutual suspicion. Cypher guided the Terran Crusade through Silandri's webway portal, the hidden tunnels through space-time that the Eldar use for rapid transit across the galaxy, and navigated them toward Terra. He fought alongside them. On Luna, the moon of Terra, when the Daemon Primarch, Magnus the Red, descended with his 1,000 sons to prevent the crusade from reaching Earth, Cypher fought. He used those twin pistols against the forces of a being that counted as one of the most powerful psychic entities in the known universe, and he did not flinch. He was, for the duration of the journey, genuinely useful, genuinely capable, a warrior of extraordinary skill, fighting for the side of the Imperium. And Guilliman, who is not a stupid man, noticed all of this and did not trust him anyway, because the sword was there, and Guilliman recognized what it was. When the Terran Crusade arrived on Terra, Cypher was ready to complete his end of the bargain. He had brought Guilliman to Terra. He wanted his audience with the Emperor. He wanted to walk through the golden doors of the Sanctum Imperialis, to stand before the Golden Throne, to do the thing he had been moving toward for 10,000 years. Guilliman reneged on the deal. The Primarch had the Adeptus Custodes take Cypher into custody. His reasoning, never explicitly stated but clearly implied, was that whatever Cypher intended to do in the Emperor's presence, whether gift or assassination or something more complex than either, was too uncertain, too unpredictable, too potentially catastrophic to risk. Even after everything Cypher had done for him, even after the service rendered, the lives saved, the battles fought together, Guilliman would not let Cypher anywhere near his father. Cypher apparently took this with equanimity. He expressed confidence that he would escape from his new prison, and he was right. Section 10. The Dark Cells and the Palace. The Adeptus Custodes took Cypher to the Dark Cells. Let that name sit with you for a moment. The Dark Cells. They are real, or as real, as anything in this universe is, and they are exactly what the name suggests. They are located deep beneath the Imperial Palace on Terra, so far below the surface that they exist in a kind of permanent night, in stone chambers sealed by runic locks and psychic wards and sanctic circles. 100 custodians patrol the corridors at all times. The cells are designed to contain things far beyond ordinary human comprehension artifacts from the Age of Strife, entities that had been captured rather than destroyed, because destruction was not possible or not sufficient, things whose mere existence represented a potential annihilation of the Imperium if they were ever to escape. And they put Cypher in there, among the artifacts, among the contained catastrophes. The Shadow Keepers, the specific shield host of the Adeptus Custodes, tasked with maintaining the dark cells, had never failed to contain something once it was properly secured. These were warriors of extraordinary capability, guardians of the most secure prison in human history, dedicated to their duty with the absolute devotion that custodians bring to everything they undertake. Cypher was gone within hours. Within hours of being placed in a cell that had never been breached, in a facility maintained by beings who had never lost a prisoner, the custodians patrolling the cells were found slain. Not overwhelmed by numbers or force, simply dealt with, quietly and efficiently, by a single figure in white robes, who had either anticipated exactly where he would be held or adapted so quickly to the situation that it amounted to the same thing. He did not simply escape, either. That is the part that makes this episode genuinely astonishing. He did not just find his way out of the dark cells and flee the Imperial Palace. He moved through the most heavily defended structure in human history, a place honeycombed with custodians, with warriors of the Dark Angels who had followed him to Terra in pursuit, with assassins dispatched by organizations whose entire purpose is eliminating specific targets, and he moved through all of it with apparent deliberateness, not fleeing, advancing. Because Cypher was not trying to escape Terra. Not primarily. Not yet. He was trying to reach the throne room. This revelation, which comes through the account of his escape, reframes everything. The deal with Gilliman, the journey to Terra, the acceptance of imprisonment, all of it was a means to an end, and the end was getting close enough to the Emperor to complete his journey. When Guilliman reneged and the custodians took him to the dark cells, Cypher did not abandon his goal. He simply changed his route. Using a forgotten passage within the Imperial Palace, one of the ancient routes built into the structure of the place that subsequent generations had lost track of, which Cypher apparently knew about from sources or experiences that his dossiers do not explain, he moved toward the Sanctum Imperialis, the Path of Martyrs, as this route is described, allowed him to navigate around the most heavily trafficked corridors while fighting off the Dark Angels and assassins who had managed to track him even through the chaos of an imperial palace under siege by demonic incursion from the Monasteich. Great Rift. He fought through all of them. He reached the Bridge of Ascension, the approach to the throne room, the final door, the last step. And there, he was stopped. Not by the custodians in force, not by the Dark Angels who had been hunting him for 10,000 years, not by the assassins whose entire profession is the elimination of exactly this kind of target. He was stopped by a single wounded custodian warden named Hecaron, who confronted him with a message, a vision, something communicated to him by the Emperor himself from within the Golden Throne. 2 words, not yet. Cypher looked at the wounded custodian. He looked at the door beyond. He looked at whatever 10,000 years of purpose and patience had been building toward, the sword on his hip, the moment he had been working toward through an incomprehensible span of solitary effort. And he accepted the message. He turned around. He left the palace. Not yet. Not rejection. Not refusal. A deferral. A timing instruction from the one being whose authority over this situation even Cypher, apparently, acknowledges. The Emperor knows. Whatever Cypher is doing, whatever the sword is for, whatever the plan is, the Emperor knows, and the Emperor has said, not yet. The time is not right. The moment has not arrived. Come back. Wait. Keep moving. Section 11. The Massacre at Darkmoor. Having escaped the Imperial Palace with the message he had received, Cypher left Terra. He was immediately the subject of the most concentrated pursuit the Dark Angels had undertaken in centuries. Elements of half a dozen of the Unforgiven chapters, the successor chapters of the Dark Angels, who share the secret and the obsession with hunting the fallen, converged on intelligence about his movements. Multiple companies from the Angels of Vengeance, the Consecrators, and the Guardians of the Covenant all deployed to the shrine world of Darkmoor, following reports that place Cypher in that system. 1,000 Space Marines, veteran warriors, many of them carrying centuries of experience and training, all of them burning with the obsession that defines the Unforgiven's relationship with the Fallen, all of them after one figure in white robes. Darkmoor was a trap, a well-orchestrated, comprehensive, devastating trap. The Unforgiven companies that arrived on Darkmoor found themselves in an engagement designed to maximize their losses. The Fallen who were present had positioned themselves and their allies with a tactical precision that reflected the professional excellence of former Dark Angels warriors who, after all, had been trained by the same chapter whose successor companies were now descending on them. When it was over, fewer than 100 of the 1,000-strong Unforgiven force were alive to escape, and those 100 survived only because they pursued Cypher, who led them deliberately, obviously, in a way that they could not mistake for accident to a secret teleportation device that took them away from the massacre. He saved them. The man they were there to capture, the figure who had just orchestrated a disaster that killed 900 of their brothers, led the survivors to safety as they fled. Why? Because Cypher does not want the Unforgiven destroyed. Because their pursuit of him serves a purpose that their deaths would not. Because, and this is speculation, but it is speculation, grounded in the pattern of his behavior, he needs the Dark Angels chapter and its successors to keep existing, keep hunting, keep paying attention to him specifically, rather than abandoning the pursuit and turning their resources elsewhere. Or perhaps he has a conscience. Perhaps, for all the manipulation and the calculated use of others as instruments, there is something in him that cannot simply watch hundreds of brothers die for nothing. Perhaps the pity he showed in leading the survivors to safety tells us something real about who he is underneath the centuries of mystery. The custodians who imprisoned him are also still in pursuit, a combined force of Adeptus Custodes and Sisters of Silence under a shield captain named Dareth has been tasked with recovering the escaped prisoner. Multiple hunter-killer teams are in the field. The Officio Assassinorum has, in the past, dispatched operatives who have uniformly failed to terminate their target, and Cypher moves, patient, purposeful, carrying his sword, firing his pistols, wearing his robes, drawing danger and destruction around him like a gravitational field, moving wherever he is moving next, with the unhurried confidence of someone who has been told that the moment will come. Just not yet. Section 12. Who is he really? The theories. There is no settled answer to the question of Cypher's identity, allegiance, or purpose. This is not a limitation of the available lore. It is a deliberate choice by the people who create and maintain this universe. Cypher is meant to be unresolved. He is meant to represent a question rather than an answer. But the theories are rich and interesting, and they are worth examining carefully, because each one illuminates something different about the character. The first and most fundamentally important question is whether the Cypher active in the 41st millennium is the same person who existed on Caliban 10,000 years ago or a successor to the title. The evidence for multiple Cyphers is genuinely substantial. The Lord Cypher was a role, not a name. The role required the abandonment of personal identity. It involved wearing, concealing robes. It carried specific traditions about the keeper of secrets and traditions that the Dark Angels maintained. If the title has been passed from person to person, each new Cypher inheriting the equipment, the methods, the personality, the purpose of the ones before then, the figure we are watching in the 41st millennium may be a kind of institutional memory made flesh, a continuity of purpose rather than a continuity of person, and this would make the mystery of his true name even more fundamentally unanswerable, because there may not be a single true name. There may be a lineage of them. Against this, the evidence that speaks to a single, continuous individual is the seemingly impossible longevity. Space Marines do not age in the way baseline humans do, but 10,000 years is extraordinary even by their standards. The warp, however, does not follow ordinary rules of time. The same storm that scattered the fallen across time and space could, theoretically, have affected Cypher's personal timeline in ways that make his apparent age meaningless as evidence. The strongest single piece of evidence for the Zahariel theory, the idea that Cypher is specifically Zahariel Elzurius, The Dark Angel's librarian, who became a powerful chaos sorcerer during the events on Caliban, is the code word Starfire. During his most recent capture by the Dark Angels, Cypher spoke this word. It was the code word used to activate the orbital defense weapons that fired on Lionel Johnson's fleet during the fall of Caliban, and it was known to only 4 people at the time: Luther, Astalan, Gryphane, and Zahariel. The knowledge of that specific code word, after 10,000 years, is not something that can be coincidental. Either Cypher is one of those 4 people, or he obtained the information from one of them through means unknown. The loyalist theory that Cypher is secretly working for the Imperium, or for the Emperor specifically, is perhaps the most emotionally satisfying reading of the character. Under this interpretation, the 10,000 years of apparently chaotic and destructive behavior makes sense as the work of someone who cannot operate openly, who has been branded a traitor before he could explain himself, who works in shadow because the light has been closed to him. The uprisings he causes, looked at across sufficient timescales, have the shape of a defensive strategy rather than a campaign of destabilization. He draws the Imperium's attention to threats. He strengthens defenses. He manipulates events to prevent worse outcomes than the ones he causes. And the Emperor who knew and sent the message, not yet, through his wounded custodian, has apparently endorsed this, deferred his arrival, yes, refused his audience in this specific moment, yes, but not rejected him, not condemned him, not ordered his execution. That is significant. The Emperor of Mankind, who has been aware of Cypher for 10,000 years and could have sent the instruction to kill him at any point, has apparently chosen not to, has apparently allowed the hunt, allowed the pursuit, allowed the mystery, but held back the final word of condemnation. The darker reading that Cypher serves no one but himself, that his agenda is his alone, that he has spent 10,000 years pursuing a goal that neither the Imperium nor Chaos would recognize or endorse, is the most intellectually interesting version of the character. It makes him genuinely alien to both sides of the conflict that defines this universe. Not a hero, not a villain, but something that operates outside the categories entirely. A figure defined by purpose rather than allegiance, whose loyalty is to something so personal or so abstract that no existing faction can claim him. There is also the possibility that even Cypher does not fully understand what he is doing, that he is operating on instructions or instincts or memories that are themselves incomplete, that he is executing a plan whose full context was lost to him long ago and which he has been trying, across millennia, to reconstruct. Perhaps the most honest answer to who Cypher really is this: he is a question. He is the universe's way of asking whether purpose can be meaningfully separated from allegiance, whether someone can do terrible things for genuine reasons, whether a man who has spent 10,000 years as the galaxy's most wanted figure can be, at the end of it all, simply trying to set something right. The lore does not answer the question, and perhaps that is the point. Section 13. The Mechanics of Mystery. Why Cypher Works. Understanding why Cypher functions as such a compelling character requires thinking about what mystery actually does in storytelling. Because Cypher is not mysterious by accident. His ambiguity is not a failure of characterization. It is the characterization. The uncertainty is the content. In a setting as grimdark and explicitly nihilistic as Warhammer 40,000, a universe whose defining statement is, there is only war, a universe that has never pretended to be anything other than a dark mirror held up to human institutions and human hubris, the presence of genuine ambiguity is unusual. Most things in the 40,000 universe are what they appear to be. Chaos is corrupt and corrupting. The Imperium is brutal and inefficient, but mostly sincere. Xenos are alien in ways that range from comprehensible to entirely incomprehensible. The categories are hard. Cypher refuses the categories. He slips between them. He is defined by what he is not, more clearly than by what he is. He is not a confirmed Chaos agent. His actions too often work against Chaos interests for that to hold. He is not a confirmed loyalist. His methods and his history are too compromised for the Imperium to simply adopt him. He is not a neutral party. His investment in the outcomes of these conflicts is too obviously deep and personal for neutrality to be an accurate description. He exists in the negative space between the categories, and negative space in any composition is where the eye is drawn. It is where meaning accumulates. It is where the story breathes. This is also why the deliberate choice by Black Library authors to never definitively resolve Cypher's nature, even in a novel told from his own perspective, in his own voice, is actually the correct creative decision. Resolving Cypher would diminish him. If it was revealed definitively that he serves the Emperor, and everything he has done has been in loyal service, he becomes a hero with an unusual methodology, and the 10,000 years of mystery becomes a plot twist rather than a philosophical statement. If it was revealed definitively that he is a chaos agent, and the redemption narrative is false, he becomes a villain who was good at concealing his nature, still interesting, but flattened. The mystery allows him to be all of the things simultaneously. The embodiment of a question the universe does not answer. Can trust be rebuilt after 10,000 years of apparent betrayal? Can purpose survive that long without being distorted beyond recognition? Can one person matter enough, in a universe this large and this violent and this indifferent to individual significance, to maintain a plan across that kind of time? His physical presence as a miniature and character for the tabletop game reinforces this. He has been deployable in armies on both sides of the conflict, with Chaos forces in some editions, with Imperial forces in others, as an ally to almost anyone under the right conditions, but owned by no one. He literally cannot be the warlord of a force. He is never the leader. He is always the enigma at someone else's table, doing whatever he came to do in the context of someone else's war, serving his own inscrutable agenda while the people around him pursue theirs. And his rules, across multiple editions, have consistently reflected the impossibility of permanently killing him. He vanishes. He escapes. He is never confirmed dead. Even on the tabletop, the universe refuses to let him be definitively ended. Section 14, The Dark Angels and Their Curse. To fully appreciate what Cypher represents, you also need to understand what he represents specifically to the Dark Angels, because he is not merely a mystery for the Imperium at large. He is the mystery that defines a chapter, the wound at the center of a brotherhood's identity. The Dark Angels are obsessed with the fallen, in a way that has, over 10,000 years, distorted them. They are not evil, not in any simple sense. They are sincere believers in the Emperor and the Imperium, warriors who have fought and bled and died in the defense of humanity countless times. But the secret they carry has twisted them. It has made them secretive, beyond even what the Space Marine's generally opaque culture demands. It has made them willing to abandon campaigns, to let planets fall, to sacrifice the lives of innocents if it means they can pursue and capture a fallen. It has made the interrogator chaplains into something that the original Dark Angels would not have recognized and might not have endorsed. Cypher sits at the center of all of this. He is the fallen who can never be caught, the testimony that can never be silenced, the possibility that keeps the wound open. Every time he escapes, every time he slips through another trap, every time he appears somewhere unexpected and does something incomprehensible, he reminds the Dark Angels that they are not in control of their own secret. That 10,000 years of hunting have not resolved their shame. That the truth about Caliban is still out there, walking around in white robes with a pistol in each hand. There is a prophecy that sometimes surfaces in the older lore, in fragmented form, that only Cypher can offer the Dark Angels true absolution. That if he can present the sword to the Emperor and have it made whole, the fallen will be forgiven, and the chapter's secret shame will finally be resolved. This prophecy, if it is even a prophecy rather than a hope, expressed in the language of faith, should make the Dark Angels want to help Cypher rather than capture him, should make their interest in him protective rather than predatory. Instead, they hunt him, because they cannot trust him, because 10,000 years of mystery is not a foundation for trust, because the inner circle has long since crossed lines that would be difficult to explain to any outside observer, and the explanation for those crossings begins with, "We are hunting the fallen," and ending the hunt would mean reckoning with everything done in its name. Cypher is, in this reading, the Dark Angel's conscience, the walking, breathing, eternally escaping embodiment of the question they dare not ask themselves. What if the thing we have built our entire identity around for 10,000 years is wrong? Section 15. The Watchers in the Dark. No discussion of Cypher is complete without at least touching on the Watchers in the Dark, because they connect to him in ways that are never explained and that somehow feel central to his mystery. The Watchers are the small, robed, non-human figures that have accompanied the Dark Angels since the earliest days of the chapter. They are not space marines. They are not human. Their faces, if they have faces, are never seen beneath their hoods. They appear at significant moments, particularly during the administration of the Deathwing Terminators and in other ceremonies connected to the chapter's secret history. They seem to know things. They seem to understand things. They act as if they are bound to the chapter by a commitment older than the chapter itself. Their origin is never clearly established. They may be remnants of Caliban's pre-human inhabitants. They may be Xenos beings with their own agenda who have chosen to align themselves with the Dark Angels for reasons of their own. They may be something even stranger, the physical embodiments of the chapter's own psychic weight, perhaps, given form by the collective guilt and obsession of 10,000 years of the unforgiven. What is known is that the Watchers assisted Cypher during his voluntary surrender to the Inner Circle. They helped him influence the chapter's leadership in the specific ways needed to execute his plan with the Tukulcha engine. The fact that the Watchers' beings, who are understood to be fundamentally connected to the Dark Angel's well-being and secrets, would assist Cypher in his goals, suggests either that they understand what Cypher is doing, approve of it, or that Cypher has some relationship with them that predates even the chapter's current understanding. Either way, the Watchers' involvement around Cypher is one of the most intriguing threads in the whole mythology, and one of the least resolved. They point towards something older and stranger than the Horus Heresy, something that goes back to Caliban before the Primarch, before the Order, to the deep history of a world that was always saturated with warp energy, in ways that may still be resonating in the figure who carries the Lord Cypher title today. Section 16. The significance of not yet. Return with me to that moment on the Bridge of Ascension. The wounded custodian. The two words, not yet. This is, in the context of the entire Warhammer 40,000 narrative, one of the most remarkable moments in recent lore, because it implies something extraordinary, that the Emperor, from within the Golden Throne, reaches out not to condemn, not to order killed, not to denounce as traitor, but to defer, to postpone, to say, your moment will come, but it has not come yet. If the Emperor's message to Cypher is genuine, and the messenger was a custodian guided by a vision, which is about as authoritative a delivery mechanism as this universe offers, then several things follow from it. The Emperor knows what Cypher has been doing. The Emperor has known for the entire 10,000 years, or at least for a significant portion of them, and the Emperor has not condemned it, has not ordered the Dark Angels to stand down from their hunt, admittedly, but that might itself be intentional. The hunt serves a purpose. The pursuit keeps Cypher moving and vigilant and properly tested, perhaps. Or the politics of admitting to the Dark Angels that their greatest quarry serves the Emperor's own ends are simply too complicated to manage. The Emperor has also not ordered Cypher's execution. The Officio Assassinorum takes contracts on targets when the relevant authorities approve them. If the Emperor wanted Cypher dead, there are mechanisms for that. They have apparently not been invoked. And the Emperor has, apparently, a plan that involves Cypher, a plan that is not ready to be executed yet, a moment that has not arrived, a purpose that the 10,000 years of wandering has been preparing for. This gives the Cypher narrative something unusual in Warhammer 40,000, genuine hope, not the cheap, easily revoked kind of hope that is deployed as a dramatic feint before the grimdark comes crashing back down. The deep, structural kind of hope, the kind built into the bones of the story, implied by the Emperor's own knowledge and apparent sanction. Something is coming, some moment that the 10,000 years of Cypher's impossible journey has been preparing for. Some use for the sword, or the man carrying it, or both together, that the Emperor has already foreseen, and that the Lord of the Fallen has been patiently, inexorably, through all the wars and losses and escapes and betrayals, working toward. We do not know what it is. We may not know for years or decades or editions of the game. The question may remain open long after the people writing the lore today have moved on to other projects. But the not yet means it is coming. That is not nothing. In a universe defined by the grinding certainty of never-ending war, in a setting where hope is usually deployed only to make its eventual destruction more painful, not yet, from the Emperor of Mankind, is close to a promise. Section 17. Cypher, in the era Indomitus. The current era of Warhammer 40,000 lore, the Age of the Dark Imperium, sometimes called the Era Indomitus, is defined by the Great Rift, by Guilliman's return, by the Primera Space Marines who have reshaped every chapter's capabilities, and by the sense that the Imperium has entered a new and even more dangerous phase of its existence. In this era, Cypher remains in motion. He escaped from the Dark Cells. He attempted to reach the Emperor and was told to wait. He led the Unforgiven into the massacre at Darkmoor. He is being pursued by the Dark Angels, by the Custodians, by the Sisters of Silence, by the Assassinorum. And through all of this, he is doing what he has always done, moving, watching, waiting for the moment the Emperor told him had not yet come. The Great Rift itself, the Cicatrix Maledictum, the tear across the galaxy that plunged half the Imperium into the warp shadow of chaos, does not seem to have deflected him. If anything, the current catastrophic state of the universe might be exactly the kind of context in which his purpose becomes relevant. The Fallen are scattered across a galaxy that is now more directly accessible to chaos than at any point since the heresy itself. The Dark Angels are stretched thin. The secret of Caliban is more fragile than ever, as the chapter is tested beyond its capacity to conceal the truth while also fighting for the Imperium's survival. Some speculate that the arrival of Lionel Johnson, who has now returned to the setting in recent lore, awakened from the slumber that the warp storm cast him into, carrying new purpose and new awareness, will change Cypher's situation in ways that cannot be predicted. Because if the Lion is back, and if the Fallen can be genuinely offered absolution by their Primarch, rather than simply tortured into confession by the interrogator chaplains, then the entire framework of the Dark Angel's secret may shift. And Cypher, who has always been positioned in relation to that secret, would shift with it. The Lion and Cypher have never met in the current timeline, or if they have, it has not been recorded. But the tension between those two figures, the Primarch who was nearly killed in the fall of Caliban, and the Fallen who has been carrying something toward the Emperor ever since, is perhaps the most dramatically loaded relationship in the entire setting. When they finally encounter each other, whatever happens will be significant. The lore is building towards something. The convergence of Guilliman's return, the Lion's reawakening, the Great Rift, the Era Indomitus, and Cypher's patient journey toward a moment the Emperor called not yet. All of these threads are moving toward an intersection. Whether that intersection will be revealed gradually over future editions and publications, or saved for some grand narrative event, is something only the people at Games Workshop and Black Library currently know. What we can say is that the stage is being set for Cypher's moment to arrive. Section 18. Why he matters. The deeper question. There is a reason why Cypher has endured as a figure in this universe for decades. Not just because the mystery is engaging, though it is. Not just because the ambiguity is unusual in a setting that is usually quite explicit about its moral categories, though it is. But because the questions Cypher embodies are questions that resonate beyond the fiction. What does it mean to maintain purpose across time that would erode it in most people? What does it mean to be defined, for others, entirely by your worst moment, by a fall that you may or may not have chosen, in circumstances that you may or may not have controlled? What does it mean to serve a cause so quietly and so indirectly that your service is indistinguishable from the outside, from betrayal? The Warhammer 40,000 universe is a place where these questions are lived at scale, where entire civilizations are judged by a moment of failure, where the definition of loyalty has been stretched so far by necessity that it barely resembles what the word originally meant, where the people doing the most important work are often the people being hunted, condemned, misunderstood. Cypher is the universe's acknowledgement that the story is not as simple as it looks, that the grimdark has space in it for something that cannot be categorized, for someone whose loyalty is to something so deep and so personal that even a Primarch's judgment cannot definitively evaluate it. He is the Dark Angel's shadow, the piece of their history they cannot look at directly. He is the Emperor's patience made manifest, the thing that moves at the rate of purpose rather than urgency. He is the Fallen who fell, perhaps, in a direction that nobody expected. And he is still out there, still wearing the white robes, still carrying the sword, still waiting for the moment that has not come yet. The galaxy turns. The great rift bleeds darkness across the stars. The unforgiven push forward in their endless, obsessive hunt. The custodians search. The assassins fail. And somewhere in the dark between the stars, in the quiet between one war and the next, a figure with no name adjusts the sword at his hip, raises his twin pistols, and takes another step toward whatever he is walking toward. Patient, purposeful, impossible to catch. The Lord Cypher moves. Not yet, but soon. Section 19. The Gift of Unresolution. One of the most remarkable things about Cypher from a creative standpoint is how successfully the lore has maintained his ambiguity across decades of being an active character. In an era where stories tend toward resolution, where audiences expect reveals, where mysteries are treated as problems to be solved rather than conditions to be sustained, Cypher has remained genuinely mysterious in a way that most characters cannot. Part of this is structural. Because Cypher exists across multiple media codexes, novels, short stories, audio dramas, tabletop rules, no single author controls his narrative. John French wrote Cypher, Lord of the Fallen, with Cypher's own voice as the narrator, and still managed to preserve the ambiguity by making Cypher an explicitly unreliable narrator. The novel is remarkable for this. It gets inside the head of the most mysterious figure in the setting and comes out the other side with him still fundamentally mysterious, because the character himself curates what he shares and what he conceals, even in his own internal monologue. This is a sophisticated creative choice. It acknowledges that Cypher's mystery is not about information. The author is withholding it, is about a character who is constitutionally incapable of straightforwardness, who has inhabited the role of the keeper of secrets for so long, who has operated in shadow for so many thousands of years, that even his relationship with his own inner life is filtered through that deeply ingrained habit of concealment. The Warhammer 40,000 lore has a long tradition of unresolved mysteries. The nature of the Watchers in the Dark, the true extent of the Emperor's plan, the fate of the lost Primarchs. But most of these mysteries are peripheral to the central action. Cypher is not peripheral. He has been present at some of the most significant events of the current era. He helped revive and transport Robut Guilliman. He nearly reached the Emperor's throne room. He orchestrated the massacre at Darkmoor. He is an active participant in the largest events in the settings present, and he remains mysterious anyway. That is genuinely difficult to sustain in narrative. Most characters, when their actions become consequential enough, end up having their motivations clarified whether the author intends it or not. The weight of what they do reveals why they do it. Cypher defies this. His actions accumulate, they become consequential, they change the shape of events, and they still do not resolve. The mystery deepens rather than lightens, because each new action opens new questions that did not exist before. It helps that the universe he inhabits is one of staggering scale, where the full context of any single figure's actions might take centuries to become clear. Cypher's operations across thousands of worlds and 10,000 years can always be interpreted in multiple ways because the data set is too large and too complex for any single analytical frame to encompass. He may be doing one thing, or he may be doing several things simultaneously, and distinguishing between them requires a perspective that no character in the story, including Cypher himself, potentially actually possesses. This is what makes him genuinely, durably mysterious rather than simply withheld. He is not a locked box waiting to be opened. He is a phenomenon that does not reduce to a single explanation. Section 20. The Long Road Home. Let us come back to the basics of what we know, and let them sit with you in their full weight. There is a space marine who has lived for at least 10,000 years. He carries a title that belonged to someone before him, and may have belonged to others in the space between. His real name has been deliberately erased, not just from the records of other people, but from himself. He wears white robes over ancient armor that predates almost everything that currently exists in the Imperium. He carries twin pistols that he has never been known to miss with, not once, not in any engagement on record. He carries a sword at his hip that he has never drawn. He has been hunted for 10,000 years by some of the most determined pursuers in the galaxy. He has escaped every prison, slipped every net, evaded every assassin. He has killed when he needed to, and helped when he wanted to, and caused chaos that sometimes turned out to be protection in disguise. He has manipulated everyone who has ever thought they were using him. He has been to Terra. He stood within sight of the Emperor's throne room. He was told, by a message that the Emperor himself apparently sent through a wounded warrior's vision, that he should not enter yet. And he accepted that message and walked away, carrying everything he had carried for 10,000 years back into the darkness of the galaxy to wait. He is still out there, moving, patient, waiting for the moment that has not arrived. He is the Lord of the Fallen, the Keeper of Secrets, the figure in white robes that the Dark Angels would give almost anything to hold in their hands, and cannot. He is proof that the universe is more complicated than it appears, that people are more than the worst thing they ever did or were accused of doing, that purpose can outlast everything except the person carrying it. He is, without competition, the most mysterious character in Warhammer 40,000. And the mystery matters. It does not matter because it will be resolved, it may never be. It matters because it is honest. It is the universe admitting that it does not always know what things mean while they are happening, that the full story is not available in the moment, that sometimes the most important figures are the ones you cannot categorize. There is something quietly radical about that, in a fictional universe that so often celebrates the certainty of force and the clarity of violence. In the grimdark, where the categories of loyalty and betrayal are enforced with extreme prejudice, Cypher persists in defying categorization. He keeps moving. He keeps escaping. He keeps being the thing that nobody can explain. And in that refusal to be explained, he carries something rare, the possibility that not everything is already lost, that somewhere in the dark, something is moving toward a destination that has not yet arrived, that the moment is coming, and when it comes, it may be something that the 10,000 years of war and loss and waiting will finally make sense in the light of. Not yet, but the Lord Cypher is still walking. If you have made it this far, thank you, genuinely. Stories like Cypher's are the reason this universe holds such a powerful grip on those of us who fall into it. They reward patience, they reward the willingness to sit with uncertainty, they reward the kind of slow, attentive listening that ASMR and lore narration are perfectly suited for. Drop a comment below and tell me what your theory is. Do you think Cypher is loyal, traitor, something altogether his own? Do you think the sword is a gift or a weapon? And tell me where you are in the world right now and what time it is. This kind of conversation is one of the most genuine pleasures of making content like this. If you enjoyed this and you have not subscribed yet, please do. There is so much more lore like this, coming deep dives into the characters and mysteries and dark corners of the 41st millennium that deserve exactly this kind of patient, atmospheric exploration. Hit the subscribe button, share this with someone who loves Warhammer, and I will see you in the next one. The galaxy is dark, the stars are burning, and somewhere in the void between them, a figure in white robes adjusts his grip on a sword he has never drawn and takes another step. End of script. Expanded sections, additional depth and detail. Expanded. The man without a name. Deeper context. Let us slow down even further on the opening question, because it deserves that slowing. When we talk about a name being absent in the context of Warhammer 40,000, we are talking about something that carries weight in this universe, that it does not carry in ours. In the Imperium of Man, names are not simply labels. They carry lineage, loyalty, history. A Space Marine name is bound to his chapter, to his gene seed, to the Primarch from whose genetic legacy he descends. Names in the Adeptus Astartes are ceremonial. They are earned, in some cases. They are part of the armor that a warrior wears, as functional in their way as the ceramite that covers his body. To strip away a name is to perform something close to identity surgery. It leaves a wound. The title of Cypher, this replacement, for whatever name the person underneath was born with or earned carries with it, a specific implication about the relationship between identity and role. The ancient knights of Caliban who instituted the position understood that the Lord Cypher needed to be, in a functional sense, nobody. Not nobody in the sense of insignificance, nobody in the sense of having no personal history that could compromise the role, no personal relationships that could bias the keeper of tradition toward any faction within the order, no personal ambitions that could distort the custodianship of secrets. This is, in its way, a philosophical idea about leadership and neutrality. The person in the role becomes the role. The mask becomes the face. And this is, equally, a deeply disturbing idea when you consider it fully, because it describes a process of voluntary self-erasure that would be considered, in any other context, a form of psychological dissolution. The Lord Cypher was not simply someone who kept secrets. The Lord Cypher was someone who had agreed to stop being a someone in exchange for the privilege of keeping those secrets. Now project that across 10,000 years, whatever person originally took the title, however many people may have held it since, has been performing that identity for longer than most civilizations in the galaxy have existed. At what point does the performance become the reality? At what point does the role fully consume the person wearing it, so that asking, "Who is Cypher?" really becomes as meaningless as asking what color a flame is underneath its light? The Warhammer 40,000 universe has always been interested in the ways that institutions consume the people who serve them. The Space Marines themselves are perhaps the most extreme example young men recruited in adolescence, subjected to biological and psychological transformation so profound that the person who goes in is not the person who comes out, shaped into something superhuman at the cost of almost everything that made them human in the first place. The Dark Angels are a more extreme version, still, an institution that has maintained a consuming secret for 10 millennia and bent its entire culture around the maintenance of that secret. Cypher is the furthest point on this spectrum. He is a person who agreed to erase themselves, and then, somehow, has maintained that erasure for an incomprehensible length of time. Whether anything of the original individual survives underneath the role, some residue of whoever was there before the robes, and the title, and the twin pistols, is impossible to know from outside. And yet, the message was sent to him specifically. The Emperor, who presumably can see past any concealment, who has psychic sight that transcends ordinary perception, sent his 2 words to this specific individual, not to the role, not to the title, to something underneath the centuries of accumulated concealment that the Emperor recognizes as being worth addressing directly, which suggests that someone is still in there, that the person beneath the cipher is not entirely gone. The idea that the Emperor of mankind is perhaps the only being in the galaxy who knows who Cypher actually is, who his real name is, what the sword is really for, what the plan has always been, is one of those thoughts that, when it lands, makes the whole mythology feel significantly weightier. The Emperor sits on his golden throne, slowly dying, unable to speak directly to anyone except through rare and ambiguous psychic communications. And one of the very few things he has found a way to communicate across that enormous barrier of death and deterioration is a timing instruction for a figure that everyone else in the galaxy is trying to kill. That is not the action of a being who has condemned Cypher. That is the action of a being who has kept a secret of his own, expanded, the Horus Heresy, what Cypher did in the darkness. There is a piece of Cypher history during the Horus Heresy itself that is often overlooked in the broad strokes of his mythology, but which tells us something significant about the direction of his allegiance, or at least about the directions he has chosen not to go. During the early stages of the heresy, when Caliban was already drifting toward Luther influence, but before the final fall, Cypher was involved in an operation of considerable complexity. A figure named Garviel Loken, a survivor of Horus' own Luna Wolves Legion, who had witnessed the Primarch corruption at Davin and had subsequently been recruited into the Knights Errant, the secret organization of loyal Space Marines gathered by Malkador, the Sigillite, to conduct operations that could not be conducted openly, was sent to Caliban. His mission was to assess the allegiance of Luther and determine whether the garrison of the Dark Angel's homeworld could be counted as loyal in the coming conflict. Loken was captured. He and another knight-errant, Yakton Cruz, found themselves imprisoned on Caliban, awaiting an uncertain fate in a situation where the wrong decision by Luther, increasingly erratic and chaos-influenced leadership, could have ended them permanently. And Cypher helped break them out. Working in shadow, as always, Cypher assisted in the extraction of both Loken and Cruz from the dungeon where they were being held. He navigated them out of a hostile situation with the kind of competence that suggests this was not his first such operation. And when the Knights Errant offered him the chance to come with them, to join Malcador network of loyal operatives, to work openly for the side of the Emperor, against Horus' great betrayal, Cypher refused. He would serve in the shadows, he told them, loyal but unremembered. Loyal but unremembered. This phrase, documented in the historical records, even if only in fragments, is perhaps the most important thing Cypher has ever said. It is the closest he has ever come, in the available accounts, to a direct statement of allegiance. And it is a statement that comes with conditions that are very specifically chosen, not loyal and celebrated, not loyal and operational, within the recognized structures. Loyal in ways that cannot be attributed, that will not be recorded, that leave no trace that anyone can use to categorize him. Why? Why refuse the chance to serve openly, to work within the recognized framework of loyal resistance to the heresy? Why choose the shadows when the sunlight was available? Several possibilities present themselves. One is that he knew his identity was too complicated to survive open alignment. A survivor of the Knights of Lupus, operating under a title that was already associated with secrecy and concealment, carrying knowledge of chaos that his own adoptive order did not know he possessed, if any of that came to light, in the context of wartime loyalty assessment, the results would not have been favorable. He may have calculated that open service was too risky for him personally. Another is that he understood, even then, that the service he intended to render required the kind of freedom that official structures would not allow. That what needed to be done in the coming millennia could only be done by someone who was accountable to no one, who could be in places that official operatives could not be, who could make choices that a member of any recognized organization would have to justify to their superiors. A third, more unsettling possibility. He already knew, or suspected, how the fall of Caliban would unfold. He knew that Luther was going to break. He knew that the fallen would be scattered. He had some foreknowledge, or some calculation, or some insight into the shape of future events that told him that his service needed to begin not during the heresy, but after it. That the real work would start when the fallen were thrown across time and space, and that the only person positioned to do what needed to be done was someone who was already, by that point, impossible to categorize. This last possibility has the most interesting implications, because it suggests that Cypher's current position, hunted by the Dark Angels, distrusted by the Imperium, associated with the fallen but not confirmed as a chaos agent, was not an unfortunate consequence of the fall of Caliban, but a deliberate choice made before it happened, that he arranged to be untethered, that the freedom he exercises in the 41st millennium was engineered into his situation from the very beginning. If that is true, then Cypher patience across 10,000 years is not simply remarkable endurance. It is the execution of a plan so long-term that almost nothing else in the galaxy history compares to it. Expanded. The nature of the fallen more than traitors. The fallen are central to understanding Cypher, and they deserve more than a cursory glance. When the warp storm scattered Luther forces from Caliban, it did so in a way that was uniquely cruel, even by the standards of the ruinous powers. Most of the fallen were not transported simply through space, they were transported through time as well. Some emerged from the warp within years of the fall. Others arrived centuries or millennia later, with no subjective sense that any time had passed at all. One moment they were on Caliban, fighting in the destruction of their world. The next, they were somewhere else in the galaxy, in a time that might be hundreds of years after everything they had known had ended. Imagine that experience. You are a space marine, a being of extraordinary resilience and capability, trained for war, able to process and adapt to almost any situation. And you emerge from the warp onto a strange world, or into the void itself, and you have no idea when you are. The galaxy has changed. The Imperium you remember, fresh from the wounds of the heresy, has been replaced by something that has had centuries or millennia to calcify into an institution very different from the one you served. The chapter you belong to is now called something else, organized differently, and actively hunting you. The homeworld you came from does not exist anymore. Everything that contextualized your existence has been removed, and the only people who would shelter you, in most cases, are the forces of chaos who are delighted to have space marines of your quality and your particular psychological vulnerabilities available for recruitment. This is the situation most of the fallen found themselves in. Not chosen damnation, but circumstantial association. Many of them are not chaos worshippers in any sincere sense. They are former space marines who have done what they needed to do to survive in a galaxy that has condemned them, who have associated with chaos forces, because chaos forces were the ones offering shelter, who have in some cases fought for causes they found genuinely worthwhile in the centuries since their emergence from the warp. The Dark Angels demand that each fallen confess and repent before being granted death is not, from this perspective, a simple moral clarity. It is an institution demanding that survivors of a centuries-long psychological crisis admit to a specific culpability in events that many of them experienced as chaotic, traumatic, and not entirely of their choosing, and then it is killing them, not rehabilitating them, not integrating them, not asking whether, across the centuries since their fall, they might have done things worth accounting for on the other side of the ledger. Just confess, be silent, die. The interrogator chaplains who conduct these confessions are, in some ways, the most morally complex figures in the entire chapter. They do terrible things in service of a genuine belief. They use methods that the original Dark Angels would have condemned. And they do all of this because the secret must be maintained, because the fallen must not die as prisoners of war who might be discovered, because the chapter's shame must not become known to the rest of the Imperium. Cypher has watched this process for 10,000 years. He has seen what the chapter has become in its obsession with its secret. He has seen brothers, however, fallen subjected to the interrogator chaplain's methods. And he is still moving toward the Emperor, rather than toward revenge, or simply toward escape. Whatever his relationship to the fallen as a category, it is clearly complicated. He draws them to him. Fallen seem to gravitate towards Cypher in ways that no one has been able to explain, as if something in his presence signals safety or purpose or simply belonging. He protects some of them, at times. He is clearly not indifferent to their fates, and yet he does not lead them in any conventional sense, does not claim the title of their champion in opposition to the Dark Angels. He is among them, but not of them. The Lord of the Fallen in title, but something outside them in practice. Expanded. How Cypher operates the 1,000-year chess game. To appreciate how Cypher has survived for 10,000 years, when the most relentless hunters in the galaxy have been after him the entire time, you have to think about the mechanisms of his elusiveness, not just the supernatural quality of his escapes, but the operational logic underneath them. He does not simply hide. If he were simply hiding, the galaxy is large enough that he could probably manage it. He appears, he acts, he causes things to happen. He is visible enough that his pursuers always have something to chase, and yet they never catch him for long. Part of this is capability. His combat abilities are genuinely extraordinary. The twin pistols, the accuracy that never fails, the plasma weapon that never overheats, these are not just flavor. They are the weapons of a warrior who has had 10,000 years to develop proficiency with his tools to a degree that should not be humanly possible. He has fought in more engagements than most entire chapters have conducted. He has developed intuitions and responses that operate below conscious thought, reflexes built up over a length of practice that has no equivalent anywhere else. But pure combat ability does not explain his escapes from secured facilities. Something else is at work there. One possibility is foreknowledge, not necessarily precognition in the psychic sense, though the warp and its effects on Caliban long history mean that this cannot be ruled out. But the foreknowledge of someone who has spent 10,000 years studying imperial security systems, prison layouts, institutional habits, the specific ways that organizations like the Adeptus Custodes think about containment. He has seen enough prisons from the inside to understand them from the outside. He knows what they are designed to hold and how, and he knows the gaps. Another is preparation. Cypher never appears anywhere without having considered his exit. Every appearance, every battle, every apparent act of spontaneity is underlain by the kind of planning that 10,000 years of adversarial practice produces. He is never in a situation he has not already thought through to its likely endpoints. The surrenders are calculated, the escapes are prepared. The impression of improvisation is the product of thorough prior planning. There is also the question of allies. The Harlequins, the masked performers of the Eldar, operate outside normal factional categories, and have their own relationship with secrecy and long-term planning that makes them natural, if unlikely, associates. The fact that Cypher emerged from the Terran Crusade alongside a Harlequin Shadowseer named Silandri Veilwalker is not coincidence. The Harlequins serve Segarak, the Laughing God, whose domain is trickery and paradox and survival through misdirection values that map very cleanly onto Cypher's own operational style. What the Eldar, or at least the Harlequins, see in Cypher is itself an interesting question. They have their own long-running relationship with the galaxy fate. Their own seers and farseers and psychers have access to future probability readings that human beings cannot even conceptualize. If Cypher is part of some future that the Eldar have read and deemed worth preserving, that would explain why Harlequin agents might provide him assistance at critical moments without ever entering into a formal alliance that could be documented or categorized. The galaxy's greatest escape artist is, in other words, escaping partly because he is very good, partly because he has been very thorough, and partly because there are forces in the universe that have calculated that his survival is worth supporting. Expanded, the Dark Angels, and the weight of the secret. The psychological weight of the Dark Angel's secret on the chapter, as an institution, cannot be overstated. It has been carrying this thing for 10,000 years, and that carrying has deformed it in ways that are visible to outside observers, even when those observers do not know what they are seeing. Other chapters notice that the Dark Angels abandon campaigns without explanation, that they divert forces at critical moments to respond to what they describe, vaguely, as chapter business, that they are reluctant to share information with allied forces in ways that go beyond the general Space Marine culture of secrecy, that their internal hierarchy has an opacity to it, the inner circle within the inner circle, the nested levels of trust and revelation that seems excessive even by the standards of an organization that keeps much from the wider Imperium. What no other chapter notices, because no other chapter has the context to understand what they are seeing, is that all of these anomalies have a single explanation. The Dark Angels are not simply secretive. They are an organization defined at its deepest level by guilt, and guilt makes people behave in ways that look irrational from outside because the secret premise of their behavior is hidden. The guilt works in two directions simultaneously. There is the guilt of the original event of the fall of Caliban, of the fact that brothers fell, and the world was destroyed, and the lion was lost. This guilt is historical, inherited by generations of Dark Angels who were not present at the fall, but who carry responsibility for its concealment. And then there is the guilt of the concealment itself, the compromises and cruelties and abandonments that maintaining the secret has required, which accumulate with every passing century, and which cannot be confessed to anyone outside the inner circle without also confessing the secret itself. The interrogator chaplains are perhaps the most vivid embodiment of this accumulated guilt in action. Asmodai, the current master interrogator chaplain, is described in the lore with a kind of horrified awe. He will not stop. He will not limit himself. There is no torment he will not apply to a captured fallen in pursuit of confession and repentance. And this absolute commitment to the work, which looks from inside the chapter like dedication and from outside like fanaticism, is itself a product of the guilt loop. The work of capturing and converting the fallen is, for the interrogator chaplains, both atonement and sin. It is how they serve and how they fall a little further every time. Cypher moves through all of this like a counter-pressure. He is the force that refuses to allow the guilt to settle into permanent stasis. Every time he escapes, he disrupts the chapter's certainty that its approach is correct. Every time he acts in ways that seem to serve the Imperium, he introduces doubt into the assumption that the fallen must be silenced at all costs. Every time he draws the unforgiven into traps of his own devising, he demonstrates that the hunters have been shaped by 10,000 years of obsession into something less capable than what they started as. He is not, in this sense, simply an enemy. He is a challenge. The specific challenge that the Dark Angels cannot resolve because resolving it would require them to reckon with everything they have done and everything they have become. The Lion return complicates all of this enormously, because the Lion knows truths that the current chapter inner circle can only speculate about. The Lion was there, at the fall of Caliban. He knows what happened. He knows what Luther was and is. He knows what the Fallen represent, and he may know what Cypher has been doing and why. If the Lion and Cypher are ever in a room together, with whatever knowledge they have between them, the Dark Angel's 10,000-year certainty about its own history could be undone in an hour. Expanded. The voice of the Emperor. There is a mode of operation that Cypher has adopted at various points in his history that is, in some ways, the most audacious thing about him. There are records, fragmented, disputed, but consistent enough to be taken seriously, that Cypher has, on multiple occasions, operated under the alias of the Voice of the Emperor. In this guise, he presents himself as a legitimate representative of the Emperor will, carrying authority from the highest possible source to intervene in situations that would not normally admit a robed space marine with unknown allegiances. He has, under this identity, delivered instructions that were obeyed because the people receiving them could not imagine that someone would impersonate the Emperor direct messenger. He has redirected forces, triggered events, inserted himself into situations that would have been closed to him otherwise. The audacity of this is almost difficult to appreciate fully. In the Imperium of Man, claiming to speak for the Emperor is the kind of act that would result in immediate execution if the claim was not backed by the kind of proof that is almost impossible to fabricate. The Adeptus Ministorum, the Inquisition, the Adeptus Custodes, all of these organizations take the question of legitimate divine authority extremely seriously. To claim to be the voice of the Emperor is to claim a position that everyone in the room is highly motivated to disprove. And Cypher has gotten away with it, multiple times. There are two possible explanations for this. One is simply that he is extraordinarily good at playing the role that his bearing, his knowledge of imperial protocol, and his sheer confidence are sufficient to convince people who are also motivated to believe that the Emperor is somehow still active and communicating. The other is that there is something to the claim, that the Emperor is, in fact, communicating through Cypher, not directly, perhaps, not in the sense of regular instructions, but in the sense that Cypher actions are genuinely aligned with the Emperor intentions in ways that the Emperor has endorsed. That when Cypher acts as the voice of the Emperor, he is drawing on a legitimate authority that was granted to him at some point in ways that are not documented in any accessible record. The not yet message from the throne room supports the second interpretation. If the Emperor had wanted Cypher dead or permanently imprisoned, the message would have been very different. The fact that he was told to wait rather than to stop suggests an ongoing relationship between the Emperor and the Lord of the Fallen that nobody else is fully aware of. Expanded. The mechanics of the hunt. The Dark Angel's pursuit of Cypher, and of the Fallen more generally, is one of the most extraordinary institutional operations in the 41st millennium. Understanding the hunt helps understand why Cypher continued freedom is so remarkable. The chapter maintains specialized units for this work. The Deathwing, the elite Terminators of the First Company, are the primary force used to capture Fallen once their location has been established. These are warriors in tactical dreadnought armor, the heaviest personal armor available to Space Marines, who have been specifically inducted into the secrets of the chapter, and who understand that their most important mission is not fighting Xenos or Chaos, but hunting brothers who fell 10,000 years ago. The psychological complexity of that mission hunting people who are, technically, your distant predecessors, people who share your gene seed and your chapter history, is enormous. The Raven Wing, the second company, operating entirely on fast bikes and attack craft, serves as the initial hunting and tracking force. Their role is to locate the Fallen, to confirm their identity, to position the Deathwing for capture. They are the net, and the Deathwing are the hand that closes it. Their speed and their ability to operate independently across vast distances makes them ideal for pursuing a figure like Cypher, who rarely stays in one location long enough for a slower force to respond. And the interrogator chaplains most prominently Asmodai, whose name has become synonymous in the lore with a kind of merciless devotion to the chapter mission that even his brothers find difficult to look at directly, are the ones who conduct the actual work of making a captured Fallen. Repent. This is where the chapter compromises have accumulated most visibly. Asmodai in particular is described as someone who has crossed lines that the chapter collectively pretends do not exist, whose methods are documented in the chapter archives in sections that are available only to the Supreme Grand Master, and that no other member of the Inner Circle has been given clearance to read. The fact that these methods exist, that the chapter knows they exist, and that the chapter continues anyway, because the secret must be maintained, because the fallen must confess and die rather than live and potentially speak, is the clearest measure of how far the obsession with the secret has taken the Dark Angels from whatever they were before it began. Cypher has been watching this happen for 10,000 years, and whatever he feels about it, it has not stopped him from continuing to move toward his destination. Expanded, where things stand now. The galaxy of the early 42nd millennium, the era Indomitus, is a place of genuine and unprecedented crisis. The Great Rift has split it in two. Half of known space is cut off from the light of the Astronomicon that allows warp travel. Entire sectors have been lost to demonic incursion. The Imperium is fighting on 1,000 fronts simultaneously, with resources stretched beyond any previous limit. And in this context, Cypher continues his work. The massacre at Darkmoor inflicted grievous losses on the Unforgiven, pursuing him 900 Space Marines killed in a trap of his orchestration, with the survivors saved by his own deliberate action in leading them to a teleportation device that extracted them from the ambush. He is still free, still pursued, still carrying the sword. The Lionel Johnson return has added a new dimension to everything. When the first Primarch of the Adeptus Astartes awoke from his long sleep and emerged into the 41st millennium, he brought with him the weight of 10,000 years of whatever he experienced in that strange half-death, and he emerged changed. He has shown a willingness to offer genuine absolution to fallen who repent before him, absolution that feels different from what the interrogator chaplains offer, which is really only the grant of a merciful death rather than any genuine forgiveness. If the Lion can forgive the fallen, if the Primarch, whose betrayal is the root of the entire secret, can look at his scattered brothers and offer them something real rather than something that looks like mercy from a distance, but is really just a cleaner execution, then the context of everything changes. The chapter secret becomes something that can be managed differently. The obsessive hunt becomes something that can be redirected or scaled back. And Cypher, who has been defined by his relationship to that hunt for 10 millennia, would find his situation profoundly altered. Whether the Lion knows what Cypher is doing, or intends to seek him out, or has any relationship with the Lord of the Fallen beyond the abstract connection of the fall of Caliban, this is one of the most interesting unanswered questions in the current lore. The two figures that know the most about the true history of Caliban and what happened there, and the most about what the Fallen represent, have not been in the same room in the current narrative. When they finally are, the conversation will be historic. A final thought. The Warhammer 40,000 universe is, fundamentally, a story about the difficulty of hope in impossible circumstances. It is a story that acknowledges the worst of human and post-human institutions and asks what it means to keep going anyway. What it means to serve something you believe in, even when that service is brutal and degrading and costs more than anyone should reasonably be asked to pay. Cypher is that question in its most personal form. He is not an institution. He is a person or something that was once a person and may still be one underneath everything that has been layered over them. He has served something, in silence and shadow, for longer than any other individual character in the setting has served anything. He has paid more than anyone else has been asked to pay, and he has done it without acknowledgement, without recognition, without any of the structures of meaning that make sacrifice bearable. And he has kept going. There is something in that which the narrative of this universe, for all its grimdark heaviness, cannot entirely suppress. Something that whispers, in the spaces between the wars and the suffering and the endless grinding darkness, that purpose can outlast everything. That patience is a kind of power that force cannot touch. That the person carrying the longest burden in a universe full of burdens may be, in the fullness of time, carrying it towards something that makes the wait worthwhile. The Lord Cypher is still walking. The sword is still sheathed. The moment is still coming. Not yet, but it is coming. The cost of a secret kept too long. In the long history of the Imperium, there have been many organizations that have built their identity around a secret. The Inquisition itself is fundamentally a secret-keeping body. It exists to know things that others do not, to act on information that cannot be made public, to manage threats that would cause civilizational collapse if widely acknowledged. The Grey Knights are a secret order, unknown to most of the Imperium, whose very existence is considered too destabilizing to confirm. Entire branches of the Adeptus Mechanicus maintain knowledge that they guard with the same ferocity that the Mechanicum directs at any threat to its monopoly on technical understanding. But none of these organizations have built their secret into the marrow of their identity the way the Dark Angels have. For other institutions, the secret is something they hold. For the Dark Angels, the secret is something that holds them. There is a difference, and it is significant. Holding a secret means you chose it, and you can choose to release it. Being held by a secret means it has become the structural principle around which everything else is organized. Every decision the Dark Angels make runs through the secret first. Can this alliance be trusted? What would this campaign require us to reveal? How do we manage this capture without it becoming public? The secret is the first filter through which every operational question passes, and it has been for 10,000 years. This kind of sustained concealment has a psychological cost that operates across generations. The individual members of the chapter who know the full truth, the inner circle, the Deathwing, those who have been graduated through the chapter trust structure to full knowledge, carry a weight that is not simply the burden of confidentiality. It is the burden of complicity. Every year that passes without revelation, every fallen who is captured and silenced rather than rehabilitated, every campaign that is abandoned because a fallen has been spotted nearby and must be pursued, every ally who is left to die because the chapter resources were redirected to chapter business, all of these become part of the accumulated moral cost of the secret. And that cost must be paid, somewhere, by someone. The chapter pays it in the currency of its own soul. The interrogator chaplains take on the worst of it, absorbing into themselves the cruelties required to keep the fallen silent, and are changed by what they absorb. The Supreme Grand Masters carry the full weight of knowledge that cannot be shared, and are isolated by it, even from their closest brothers. The ordinary members of the chapter go through their service without knowing why the chapter behaves as it does, and are denied the understanding that would allow them to make sense of their own experience. Cypher has been watching all of this. He has seen the price paid across 10,000 years, and he has not intervened to end it, has not gone to the wider Imperium to expose the secret, has not arranged for the information to be released through channels that would force an accounting. He has maintained the secret himself through his silence, even as he uses it as leverage and context in his own operations. Why? If the secret is a wound, why not help heal it by simply releasing the information that causes it? The answer may be that the release of the secret, done incorrectly and at the wrong moment, would be catastrophic in ways that Cypher understands, and that the short-term satisfaction of revelation would not compensate for. The Dark Angels are a chapter of 10,000 Space Marines and a dozen successor chapters. They are one of the Imperium's most capable and most ancient fighting forces. The revelation that they have been lying to the Imperium for 10,000 years, that they have abandoned campaigns and sacrificed lives and subjected prisoners to systematic torture in the pursuit of a secret they were concealing from their own masters, that revelation, dropped into the middle of the current crisis without context or management, could destroy the chapter entirely, not just its reputation. The chapter itself, as the Inquisition and its allies moved to eliminate an institution that had demonstrated it could not be trusted. That outcome would serve nobody except chaos. And Cypher, whatever else he is, has spent 10,000 years consistently doing things that do not serve chaos. The secret will be managed when the moment is right, when the lion can provide context, when the absolution is already in process, when the revelation can be accompanied by resolution rather than simply punishment. Cypher is waiting for that moment too. The same not yet that applied to the throne room applies to the secret. The weight of being nobody. There is something that deserves attention in the specific way that Cypher occupies space in this universe, and it is the question of what it costs to be, functionally, nobody. Every other significant figure in the 41st millennium has anchors. Rabut Guillemon is the Lord Commander of the Imperium, Primarch of the Ultramarines, son of the Emperor. He has a name, a history, a face, an institutional role. allies who know him, brothers who fought beside him, enemies who fear and respect him. Even the most isolated figures in the lore, inquisitors who have spent decades working alone, space marines who have been separated from their chapter and are operating independently, have identity structures that connect them to something larger, something that gives their existence context. Cypher has none of this. The name is not his name. The title is not his identity. It is a role he inhabits, the way a carrier inhabits a disease. His history is either suppressed or genuinely unknown, even to him, depending on which reading of his identity you find most convincing. His allies are temporary and functional. His enemies are legion. And the one relationship that would give him genuine grounding, the relationship with the Emperor, who apparently knows who he is and what he is doing, and has sent him a message, is mediated through death and psychic vision and the most heavily guarded structure in the universe. He is, in the most fundamental sense, alone in a way that most beings cannot conceive of, and he has been alone for 10,000 years. The Space Marine conditioning is extraordinary. The process of creating an Astartes is specifically designed to produce a warrior who can function effectively under conditions that would break most human minds. The psychological resilience built into a Space Marine through training and biological modification is genuine and deep, but it is not unlimited. The histories of the Adeptus Astartes are full of Space Marines who broke under sufficient sustained pressure, who fell to chaos, partly because the pressure of what they were asked to endure exceeded the limits of what their honor conditioning could maintain. Cypher has not broken. 10,000 years of being hunted, of being alone, of working toward a destination that kept not arriving, of doing terrible-seeming things in service of a purpose that nobody around him could understand, and he has not broken. He has not given up. He has not, apparently, fallen to the ruinous powers in any meaningful sense despite 10 millennia of proximity to chaos in ways that would destroy a lesser being. This endurance is itself remarkable. It is one of the strongest arguments for the idea that there is something genuinely different about Cypher, some purpose or protection or quality that enables a level of sustained function that the normal rules of the setting would not predict. The Emperor, knowing who he is and what he is doing, would explain it, at least partly. Having the ultimate authority in the universe as your secret sponsor, even across a barrier of death and psychic degradation, is a form of connection to something larger. It is not nothing. It is, in the cosmology of this universe, almost everything. One last question. If you have been following this story carefully, and at this point, if you certainly have been, there is one question that has been building underneath everything else, and which deserves to be named directly before we close. What if Cypher is the most important character in the current era of Warhammer 40,000 lore? Not the most powerful, not the most prominent, not the character whose actions are most clearly visible in the main narrative, but the most important, in the sense of being the character whose actions, when they are finally fully understood, will be seen to have shaped everything that came before. Guilliman is back because Cypher freed him and guided him to Terra. The Terran Crusade succeeded. The Lord Commander of the Imperium returned to active service. The Primaris Space Marine program launched. The Imperium was given the resources to survive the Great Rift. All of this has a thread that runs back to a figure in white robes who appeared on a Red Corsair's Blackstone fortress and offered a deal. Without Cypher, the Terran Crusade likely fails. Without the Terran Crusade, Guilliman stays entombed. Without Guilliman, the Imperium of the current era looks dramatically worse than it already does. That is not a small contribution. That is, arguably, the most consequential single action taken by any individual in the current era of the lore, and it was taken by a figure whose name nobody knows, whose allegiance nobody can confirm, and who was arrested for his trouble by the very Primarch he had just saved. And the sword is still undrawn. The moment that has not yet come is still coming. Whatever Cypher does when that moment finally arrives, whatever the sword is for, whoever it is meant for, whatever the 10,000 years of patient, solitary, unacknowledged service has been building toward, it will be the culmination of the longest individual story in the entire Warhammer 40,000 universe. That is worth watching. That is worth waiting for. He is the Lord Cypher. He is the keeper of the oldest secret in the Imperium and the holder of the newest mystery. He is the man without a name, who may be the most important named character in the current narrative. He is the ghost of Caliban, who has refused to stop haunting the galaxy. And he is still out there. Not yet, but soon.